The music was still playing when Sasha's hand connected with his face. It wasn't loud. Not a crack, not a dramatic echo. Just the sharp final sound of skin meeting skin. Clean and unmistakable. The room died anyway. In the private VIP lounge above Seoul, conversation collapsed into silence so complete it felt engineered. The bass cut off mid-beat. Glasses stopped mid-air. Even the city lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to pause, suspended in their glittering grid. Sasha stood close enough to see the blood bloom at the corner of Min-ho's mouth. Her palm burned. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Across from her, the man everyone in the room feared slowly turned his head back to center. Min-ho Choi did not move his hands. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice. The men around him reacted instantly. Chairs scraped back, jackets parted, the soft metallic whisper of guns being freed from holsters. A half-circle formed without a word being spoken. The kind of formation that came from practice, not panic. But Min-ho only smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cruel, it was curious. He ran his tongue once over his lower lip, tasting blood, and then looked directly at Sasha. For a moment, no one breathed. Sasha met his gaze and felt it. Pressure, not anger. Assessment, not shock. As if she hadn't just slapped him, but placed a piece on a board he'd been staring at for some time. He said nothing. That was worse than a threat. In Seoul, violence was expected. Retaliation was normal. Men like Min-ho were known for how quickly they ended problems. But silence? Silence meant calculation. Sasha felt it then. The invisible shift. The sense that whatever she had just done could no longer be undone. The room was no longer a room. It was a decision point. She took one step back. No one stopped her. Another step. Her heel struck marble too loudly. She turned, forcing her legs to move, even as instinct screamed that turning her back on this man was the most dangerous thing she could do. Still, no one touched her. She walked. Every step away from him felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted. She passed frozen faces, wide eyes, mouths slightly open. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered, the sound obscene in the quiet. The doors opened. The night rushed in. Sasha didn't look back. She ran. The elevator ride down was torture. Each second stretched thin, each floor number flashing like a countdown she hadn't prepared for. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked unreal. Eyes too bright, lips pressed tight, posture rigid with adrenaline. When the doors opened, she bolted. Out into the Seoul night, heels striking pavement, lungs burning as she shoved through clusters of people who had no idea how close they were standing to the epicenter of something catastrophic. She didn't slow until she reached the curb. A black sedan screeched to a halt. She yanked the door open and slid inside. "Airport," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, took in her face, the tension in her shoulders, the way she sat like someone expecting pursuit. He said nothing and pulled into traffic. As the city blurred past, Sasha finally let herself breathe. Her hand still stung. Good. She wanted to remember it. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched Seoul stretch endlessly into the night. Neon veins, towers of glass, a city that swallowed mistakes without blinking. Min-ho Choi ruled this city from its shadows, and she had just humiliated him. Her phone vibrated in her lap. Once. Twice. She didn't check it. Instead, her mind betrayed her, dragging her backward, past the slap, past the bar, past the moment where everything had finally exploded. Back to the beginning. Back to a quiet apartment thousands of miles away. Back to a photograph she couldn't stop looking at. A blurry image. A crowded airport terminal. A suitcase tilted at an awkward angle. And a man standing beside her sister. Tall, composed. One hand wrapped around the handle of Jade's bag like it belonged there. Min-ho. Sasha closed her eyes. She hadn't come to Seoul to slap a mafia boss. She had come to find her sister. The airport lights appeared in the distance, stark and white. The car sped toward them. Behind her, high above the city, Min-ho Choi finally moved. He lifted a hand. The guns lowered. Only then did he speak. "Find out," he said calmly, wiping blood from his mouth, why she thought that was worth dying for. The engine hummed steadily beneath Sasha as the car merged onto the highway. She didn't know it yet, but the silence she had left behind was already moving. And it never traveled alone. Let's go back to how it all started. The apartment was too quiet. Sasha noticed it most at night, when the city outside her window softened into a distant hum, and there was nothing left to distract her from the glow of her phone. She sat on the edge of her couch, shoulders hunched, and thumb hovering over the screen as if the image might change if she waited long enough. It never did. The photograph was grainy, taken in motion. An airport terminal in Seoul, all glass and light. People blurred into streaks of color, rolling suitcases, hurried steps. And in the center of it, clearer than everything else, was Jade. Her little sister stood mid-laugh, head turned toward someone just out of frame, one hand lifted as if caught in the middle of a joke. She looked lighter there, happier than she had in months. Beside her was a man, tall, sharply dressed, one hand wrapped around the handle of Jade's suitcase like it belonged to him. His face was partially turned away from the camera, profile clean and composed, posture relaxed in a way that spoke of confidence without effort. The caption beneath the photo was simple: "Made it." Seoul already feels unreal. It was the last thing Jade ever posted. 3 days later, her phone went dead. Sasha exhaled slowly and pressed her thumb to the screen, enlarging the image until it blurred further. She already knew every pixel by heart. She had studied the background signs, the reflections in the glass, the angle of the light. She had replayed that moment over and over, trying to imagine what Jade had felt just before the photo was taken. Excited, nervous, alive. Sasha had been at work when the first call came in, Jade's roommate, voice shaking, asking if she'd heard from her. Sasha had laughed then, told her to relax. Jade was 22. She was traveling. She would call when she was ready. She hadn't. The second call came from their mother. The third from a friend who had seen something online about tourists going missing overseas. By the time the embassy got involved, the tone had changed. Polite, distant, cautious. No signs of foul play, they said. No official report, they said. These things take time. Time? Sasha locked her phone and pressed it against her forehead. She had always been the responsible one, the older sister, the one who double-checked flights, who sent reminder texts, who worried so Jade didn't have to. She had helped pack Jade's suitcase for this trip, folded clothes with practiced efficiency while offering half-hearted warnings about being careful, about checking in. "I will," Jade had said, rolling her eyes, smiling. "You worry too much." Sasha had let her go anyway. The guilt settled in her chest like a stone. She rose from the couch and crossed the apartment, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The walls were lined with framed degrees, awards, evidence of a life built on control and careful planning. A career she had spent years constructing piece by piece. It suddenly felt meaningless. Her laptop sat open on the dining table, a paused video interview still on the screen. She had been scheduled for a partnership review in 6 months. She had plans, a trajectory. She closed the laptop without looking. Instead, she opened a browser window and typed in the name she had memorized days ago, Min-ho Choi. The search results were sparse. Corporate profiles, philanthropic mentions, a man photographed beside politicians, CEOs, cultural figures. Clean, impeccable, untouchable. But when she dug deeper, far deeper than most people ever bothered to go, the tone shifted. Whispers in forums, articles that vanished overnight, names that appeared once and were never mentioned again. Seoul had its own rules. And Min-ho existed where those rules ended. Sasha stared at his face on the screen, the same face from the photograph. Calm eyes, unreadable expression. Why was he helping her sister? Why was he the last person seen with her? She didn't think of revenge then. Not truly. She thought of Jade alone in a city that wasn't gentle with mistakes. She thought of her sister trusting the wrong person, following the wrong kindness. Her jaw tightened. She opened her email and typed a short message to her firm. Professional, polite, final, effective immediately. The reply came faster than she expected. Full of concern and questions she had no intention of answering. She booked the flight an hour later. One way. As the confirmation email landed in her inbox, Sasha felt something steady settle into place beneath the fear and grief. Purpose. Sharp and undeniable. She didn't need justice. She didn't need answers from people who didn't care. She needed her sister. The night before her flight, Sasha stood at the window and looked out over the city she had always known. Safe streets, familiar lights. A place where rules applied and consequences followed patterns she understood. Seoul was not that kind of place. She knew it the way you know a storm is coming. By the change in pressure, by the way the air feels too still. Outsiders didn't survive curiosity there. Sasha picked up her suitcase anyway, and boarded the plane. The law firm occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower overlooking the Han River. Steel, marble, and quiet confidence stacked neatly into the skyline. From the outside, it looked like any other elite corporate practice. From the inside, it felt different. Controlled. Sasha sensed it the moment she stepped through the revolving doors. Conversations were low, efficient. Phones were answered on the first ring. Assistants moved quickly but never rushed. No one laughed too loudly. No one lingered. Power lived here, but it wore a suit and spoke in measured tones. She checked in with reception, accepted a temporary badge, and followed an assistant into a conference room where several junior associates were already seated. Files were laid out with surgical precision. Coffee sat untouched. Everyone looked up when she entered, offering polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They were assessing her. Sasha returned the favor and took her seat, posture straight, expression neutral. She had spent the last 48 hours memorizing firm bios, corporate structures, and recent cases. She knew which names mattered and which ones were placeholders. She also knew one name that wasn't on the agenda. The meeting began without preamble. Case updates, deadlines, whispered hierarchies revealed in who spoke and who deferred. Sasha listened carefully, adding a few concise observations when prompted. Enough to signal competence, not enough to stand out. Then the air changed. It was subtle. No announcement, no dramatic entrance. The door opened, and the room shifted. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Backs straightened. Eyes lowered, not in fear, exactly, but in instinctive acknowledgement. Min-ho Choi entered as if he had all the time in the world. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored. No tie. His presence didn't demand attention. It simply absorbed it. He didn't scan the room. He didn't search for reactions. He already knew he had them. He took the seat at the head of the table without being invited, when someone slid a folder toward him before he asked. Another poured coffee, hands steady but deferential. Min-ho glanced at the document once, then looked up. His gaze moved around the table, slow, deliberate, until it landed on Sasha. He paused. Not long enough to be obvious, just long enough to register. Sasha met his eyes without flinching. They were darker than she expected. Calm, unreadable. Not cold, worse. Curious. "Who is this?" he asked softly. The question wasn't accusatory. It wasn't suspicious. It was simply factual. One of the senior partners cleared his throat. "Sasha Carter, transferred in last week. Corporate litigation, U.S. trained." Min-ho's attention didn't leave her. "American," he said. Again, not a question. "Yes," Sasha replied evenly. New York and D.C. He nodded once, as if filing the information away. And you're familiar with contract dissolution under international arbitration? Yes. Explain, he said, leaning back slightly. Briefly. The room went still. Sasha didn't hesitate. She outlined the process cleanly. Jurisdictional leverage, precedent cases, loopholes often missed by domestic counsel. She spoke without embellishment, voice calm, precise. Min-ho listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, you left out the reputational risk. Sasha inclined her head. I didn't think it needed stating. One of the associates shifted uncomfortably. Min-ho's lips curved, not quite a smile. Why not? Because the risk only exists if the opposing party believes they have leverage, she said. If they don't, reputation becomes irrelevant. Silence followed. Min-ho studied her again, and this time more openly. She could feel it, the weight of his attention, the sense that he was measuring something beyond her answer. Interesting, he said at last. He turned back to the table. Proceed. Just like that, the meeting resumed. People spoke again, pens moved. The room exhaled. But Sasha knew. She had been seen. The meeting ended 30 minutes later. As chairs scraped back and conversations broke into quiet clusters, Min-ho stood and gathered his folder. He paused beside Sasha's chair. You've been here how long? He asked. 8 days, she replied. And you already understand our problems better than most, he said lightly. She met his gaze. I listen. So do I, he said. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, challenge, warning. Then he walked away. Sasha remained seated until the room emptied. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to breathe out slowly. She replayed the exchange in her mind, cataloging every detail. The way he hadn't raised his voice, the way everyone had obeyed without question, the way he had let her speak freely instead of cutting her off. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't tested her. He had observed. That was worse. Later that evening, she reviewed her notes in the small apartment she'd rented near the firm. Her phone buzzed with a calendar update. Meeting added, private. Tomorrow. Attendees. Min-ho Choi. Sasha Carter. No subject line. Sasha stared at the screen. She had lied convincingly. About her reasons for being there, about her past, about what she was truly looking for. Every credential was real. Every word had been chosen carefully. But lies had weight. And Min-ho Choi was a man who noticed imbalance. High above the city, in an office lit only by the glow of Seoul's skyline, Min-ho reviewed a personnel file. Sasha Carter. Impressive resume. Clean history. Too clean. He closed the file and set it aside. She's hiding something, he said quietly. No one argued. He hadn't decided yet whether that made her dangerous or useful. The morning of the trial began like any other. Gray light filtered through the narrow windows of the law firm's private kitchen. The espresso machine hissed softly, steam curling into the air. Outside, the city moved with its usual precision. Cars flowing, schedules kept, nothing out of place. Sasha arrived early. She stood alone at the counter, her reflection faint in the polished steel, and set her bag down with deliberate calm. Inside it, tucked into an inner pocket, was a small, unmarked vial. Clear, odorless, measured carefully the night before. She had not slept much. Not from fear, but from certainty. The forced marriage contract was airtight on the surface, crafted by people who understood money, reputation, and pressure. The kind of document meant to end arguments before they began. But it had one flaw: timing. The lead attorney representing Min-ho had built the entire strategy around personal command of the courtroom. His presence mattered. His voice mattered. Without him, the case would default to conservative arguments and defensive positioning, which would fail. Sasha removed the lid from the vial, her movements steady. She waited until the attorney's back was turned, until he was laughing quietly with a colleague, relaxed, distracted. She tipped the vial into his porcelain cup, stirred once, set it back exactly where it had been. By the time the courtroom filled, the damage was already done. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes into opening statements. The lead attorney shifted in his seat. Once, twice. His confident cadence faltered. A bead of sweat appeared at his temple. Sasha watched from the second row, face composed, hands folded. 5 minutes later, the man excused himself abruptly, whispering something urgent to the partner beside him. The judge frowned. The opposing counsel exchanged looks. Chaos followed quickly. A whispered argument at the defense table. Papers shuffled. A junior associate ran for the door. The judge called a brief recess. When proceedings resumed, the lead attorney was gone. Eyes turned, confused, calculating. Now Sasha stood. "If the court permits," she said clearly, already stepping forward, "I can proceed." There was a pause. A murmur. The judge looked skeptical, then irritated. "Do you have standing?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied calmly, "and a full grasp of the case." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Sasha moved to the podium. The courtroom quieted. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She spoke with the precision of someone dismantling a machine she had already taken apart in her mind. She began with the contract itself, clause by clause. She exposed coercion disguised as consent, jurisdictional conflicts buried beneath ceremonial language, penalty structures designed to intimidate rather than enforce. When the rival family's attorney objected, Sasha anticipated it and countered with precedent. When they tried to shift the narrative to tradition, she brought it back to legality. When they attempted to imply reputational damage, she neutralized it with facts. There was no anger in her delivery, no performance, only inevitability. From the gallery, Min-ho watched without expression. He sat still, hands folded loosely, eyes fixed on the woman at the podium who was tearing apart a political alliance without ever raising her voice. She didn't look at him once. That impressed him more than anything else. The opposing counsel's confidence eroded visibly. Their objections grew weaker. Their posture changed. Defensive now, uncertain. By the time Sasha concluded, the outcome was already decided. The judge ruled swiftly. The marriage contract was nullified. The alliance collapsed. The rival family sat frozen, humiliated, not by force, but by exposure. As the courtroom emptied, Min-ho rose slowly. He didn't approach Sasha. He didn't thank her. He simply left. That night, Sasha was summoned to the mansion. The car ride there was silent. Seoul glowed beyond the tinted windows, indifferent to the legal war that had just ended. The mansion gates opened without pause. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Lights glowed low, shadows long across polished floors. Sasha was led into a private study. Min-ho stood by the window, back to her, jacket removed, sleeves rolled up. The city stretched endlessly below him. He didn't turn when she entered. "You arrived early this morning," he said calmly. "Yes." "You knew the lead attorney would be indisposed." "Yes." He turned then, slowly. "You altered the course of a legal battle that had been prepared for months," he continued. "Without permission." "Yes." There was no defensiveness in her tone. No apology. Min-ho studied her, eyes dark, eye unreadable. "You didn't use violence," he said. "You didn't threaten. You didn't bargain." "No," Sasha replied. "None of that was necessary." A pause. "You humiliated them," he said. "They humiliated themselves," she corrected. "I just made it visible." Min-ho walked toward her, stopping a careful distance away, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of smoke and something sharper beneath it. "You planned this," he said. It wasn't a question. Sasha met his gaze, pulse steady despite the weight of the moment. "Yes." Silence filled the room again. But this time, it was different. Not shock, not calculation, recognition. Min-ho looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not just competent, dangerous, and useful. "You'll be staying here," he said finally, effective immediately. Sasha's breath caught. "I just barely." "For your safety," he added. "And my convenience." Sasha understood immediately what that meant. The mansion was not a home. It was an extension of his authority. She arrived the next night with a single suitcase and no illusions. The gates closed behind them with a sound that carried weight. Metal meeting metal, final and deliberate. Inside, the grounds were immaculately kept. Every light placed with intention, every shadow accounted for. Cameras were visible if you knew where to look. Guards moved like fixtures rather than people. The house itself was quiet in a way that felt intentional. Not empty. Contained. A woman introduced herself as the house manager and showed Sasha to a suite on the east wing. Large, tasteful, impersonal. The kind of room designed for guests who were never meant to forget they were guests. "Your access is limited to these areas," the woman said politely, handing her a slim key card. "Meals are at set times. Security will escort you if you need to leave." Sasha nodded, taking it all in. Rules. Later that evening, Min-ho joined her in the study, not to check on her, but to establish order. "You won't enter the West Wing," he said calmly. "You won't take calls here unless approved. You won't access my private files unless I ask." Sasha listened without interrupting. "And in return?" she asked when he finished. Min-ho regarded her for a moment, as if the question itself amused him. "You'll have protection," he said. "Discretion, resources." She met his gaze. "And freedom." A pause. "You'll have honesty," he replied, "which is more than most people get." Sasha considered that, then nodded. "Then my boundaries." He gestured for her to continue. "I won't be touched," she said evenly. "Not by your men. Not by anyone in this house. I won't be lied to about matters that involve my work, and I won't be monitored in my private quarters." Min-ho's eyes sharpened slightly, not with anger, but interest. "You're asking a lot," he said. "I'm delivering a lot," she replied. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Min-ho inclined his head. Agreed. It wasn't a promise. It was an acknowledgement. From that moment on, the house adjusted around her. Not noticeably, not dramatically, but enough that she felt it. Her door was never locked from the outside. Meals arrived when she was working late. A car was always waiting, engine running when she needed to leave for the firm. No one followed her inside the library. And no one entered her room without permission. And Min-ho watched everything without appearing to watch at all. Their interactions were brief but charged. Quiet conversations over documents, late-night discussions that turned into verbal chess matches. He tested her opinions. She challenged his assumptions. Neither yielded ground easily. Sometimes she caught him observing her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, measuring the way she moved through his space, the way she never rushed, never flinched. Sometimes she noticed the protection before she noticed the threat. A car repositioned, a meeting canceled, a message intercepted before it reached her. It unsettled her more than outright control would have. At night, when the mansion settled into its controlled stillness, Sasha worked. She accessed databases through secure channels, combed embassy records, tracked missing persons reports that never made it to headlines. She searched for Jade quietly, carefully, aware that too much curiosity could be as dangerous as none at all. She found fragments, sightings, a hostel clerk who remembered an American girl asking questions, a rideshare record that ended abruptly near a district locals avoided. Nothing solid. Always Min-ho's name hovered at the edges. Not directly, never conclusively, but close enough to keep her pulse tight. She didn't ask him. Not yet. The first crack came during dinner one evening. They were seated across from each other at a long table, the space between them deliberate. A man Sasha hadn't seen before stood a little too close to Min-ho, watching her with open curiosity. Ji-hoon, she learned later, Trusted, old. His gaze lingered longer than necessary. So did the gaze of a woman standing near the doorway, elegant, sharp-eyed, assessing Sasha with something colder than interest. So young. Min-ho's people. They smiled when spoken to, offered polite conversation, asked harmless questions about Sasha's background that sounded too rehearsed to be innocent. Sasha answered carefully, maintaining the version of herself she had built. But she felt it then. The shift. Min-ho wasn't the only one watching her anymore. As dinner ended, Min-ho rose and dismissed the staff with a gesture. Ji-hoon lingered, saying something low to him that made Min-ho's jaw tighten briefly. Sasha caught it. Later, alone in her room, she stood at the window and looked out over the grounds, lights tracing the perimeter like a boundary drawn in fire. Living under Min-ho's roof gave her access, protection, and proximity to the truth. It also placed her squarely inside a court where loyalty was tested quietly, and outsiders rarely survived long. Somewhere in the mansion, doors closed softly, and Sasha understood with sudden clarity. Min-ho might be watching her with interest, but the people closest to him were watching her with intent. The first message arrived at 2:17 a.m. Sasha was awake, laptop open on the desk, the mansion quiet around her in that particular way it always was after midnight. No footsteps, no voices, only the low hum of systems designed to never sleep. She noticed the vibration before the sound, a faint tremor against the wood. Unknown sender. No text, just a video file. She stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it, every instinct warning her that once she pressed play, something inside her would change. She pressed play anyway. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. A warehouse, concrete floor, harsh white lights. Men kneeling, hands bound, fear visible even through the distortion. Min-ho stood in front of them. Not angry, not shouting, calm. He spoke briefly, too quietly for the audio to catch, then nodded once. The shot cut. Gunfire echoed in the enclosed space, sharp and final. Bodies fell, blood spread across the concrete in dark spreading shapes. Min-ho didn't flinch. The video ended. Sasha's stomach twisted. She sat frozen, phone heavy in her hand, breath shallow. She had always known, intellectually, what kind of man Min-ho was. You didn't rule his world without violence, you didn't survive it without blood on your hands. But knowing was different from seeing, different from watching his face as he ordered death with the same composure he used to discuss contracts. The phone vibrated again. This time, text appeared beneath a still image pulled from the video. You deserve to know who you're living with. She didn't sleep after that. The next few days were quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Min-ho continued as if nothing had changed. Meetings, brief conversations, measured glances that lingered a fraction longer than before, as if he sensed the shift but refused to name it. Sasha felt herself pulling back without meaning to. She spoke less, ate quickly, avoided the study when he was there. The intimacy of their earlier exchanges, those moments of intellectual sparring and unspoken alignment, fractured into careful distance. Min-ho noticed. He said nothing. That unsettled her more than confrontation would have. The second message arrived 2 nights later. This one came with documents, old ones, scanned police reports, coroner summaries, financial records tied to shell companies she recognized from her research into Min-ho's organization. Dates jumped out at her immediately. Years ago, a different life, a different version of herself, her father. She scrolled slowly, dread building with every page. The reports detailed a robbery gone wrong, an unregistered weapon, a name buried in the margins, one of Min-ho's known intermediaries. The implication was clear. Her father hadn't died because he was unlucky. He had died because he was in the way. Sasha's hands began to shake. Her father had been careful, meticulous. He had taught her to read contracts the way others read faces, to trust systems over promises. He had died when she was still in law school, The loss sharp and sudden, the explanation thin but official. She had accepted it because she had needed to. Now, sitting alone in Min-ho's house, surrounded by evidence that might not be real but felt convincing enough to wound, that acceptance unraveled. The message beneath the files was short. He doesn't just destroy enemies. He destroys families. Sasha closed the documents and pressed the phone to her chest. The house felt different after that. Smaller, closer. Every protection began to look like surveillance. Every convenience like control. The guards she had learned to ignore, now felt too present, too aware. She began to wonder how much of her search for Jade Min-ho had known about from the beginning. She began to wonder if Jade had trusted the wrong kindness. That evening, Min-ho found her in the study, standing at the window. "You've been distracted," he said. She didn't turn. "I'm working." "So am I," he replied. Silence stretched between them. He could have asked. He could have demanded. He did neither. "That won't protect you," he said quietly. She finally looked at him then, heart pounding. "From what?" "From assuming you understand everything," he said. For a moment, she almost asked him. Almost held up the phone, the footage, the documents, demanded the truth. Instead, she said nothing. Min-ho studied her face, and something like regret flickering briefly across his expression before it vanished. He nodded once and left. That night, Sasha lay awake in the dark, the images replaying in her mind. The gunfire, the documents, her father's name in cold print. Min-ho was protecting her. That much was undeniable. But what if protection was just another form of ownership? What if the man shielding her from danger was the reason her family had been destroyed in the first place? Sasha didn't steal all at once. That would have been reckless, emotional, obvious. Instead, she treated it like any other legal problem. Methodical, incremental, invisible to anyone who wasn't already looking for it. The first transfer was small, buried inside a routine liquidity adjustment between two shell entities Min-ho used to buffer overseas investments. She disguised it as a timing correction, something any competent auditor would skim past without a second glance. It cleared without incident. Her pulse barely spiked. The second transfer came days later, slightly larger, routed through a jurisdiction known for delay rather than secrecy. She wanted time more than cover. She logged every move in an encrypted ledger only she could access. Dates, amounts, paths, an exit map. Each transfer felt like crossing a line she had sworn she would never approach. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. If the documents were true, if the blood on Min-ho's hands extended to her father, then this wasn't theft. It was reclamation. That was what she told herself late at night, staring at the numbers glowing softly on her screen while the mansion slept. Still, the guilt crept in anyway, because Min-ho didn't change. He remained exactly as he had always been, controlled, attentive in his own distant way, precise with his time and his words. If anything, his presence felt heavier now, as if he were deliberately giving her space while somehow never being far. He noticed things. He noticed when a financial report crossed his desk and didn't comment on a discrepancy he should have flagged. Then when a security alert blinked and was quietly dismissed. When his chief financial officer paused mid-sentence, waiting for instruction that never came. Min-ho said nothing. He watched. Curiosity was a dangerous indulgence, but he allowed himself this one. He wanted to see how far she would go. Their interactions became quieter, not colder, stranger. They shared long silences in the study, documents spread between them, shoulders never touching yet aware of the space they occupied. Sometimes their fingers brushed when passing a file. Neither acknowledged it. Sometimes she caught him looking at her not with suspicion, but with something closer to regret. Once, late in the evening, she found him standing at the window, city lights reflecting in the glass like fractures. "You don't sleep," she said without thinking. "Neither do you," he replied. Silence followed. "You're planning something," he added. Her breath caught. You say that as if it's unusual. For you, he said calmly. It is. She almost told him then. Almost asked him outright if he had ordered her father's death. Almost demanded truth instead of fragments fed to her by smiling enemies. Instead, she closed the file she'd been holding and stepped back. The distance between them remained intact. The money continued to move, slowly, cleanly, enough to fund an escape without triggering alarms, enough to disappear, not just from Seoul, but from the reach of anyone who might come looking. She arranged documents, secured alternate identities, booked flights she didn't intend to use, canceling them just late enough to create noise in the system. She planned for contingencies. No, she planned for pursuit. And she planned for one final moment she couldn't quite define yet, but knew would be necessary. Min-ho's protection tightened even as her betrayal deepened. A driver appeared when she needed one without asking. Meetings were rescheduled around her availability. A subtle shift in security patterns made it clear he was anticipating a threat she hadn't voiced. It made her chest ache in ways she refused to examine. One night, as she returned to her room, she found a coat draped over the back of her chair. Min-ho's. No note, no explanation. She held it for a long moment, fingers brushing the heavy fabric, breathing in the faint scent of smoke and something indefinably him. She set it aside without wearing it. The final transfer cleared 2 days later. It was enough. Sasha stared at the confirmation screen, his heart steady in a way that surprised her. The plan was complete, the exit prepared. All that remained was execution. She closed the laptop and stood, moving to the mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared calm, controlled, almost cold. Good. She couldn't afford hesitation now. The day came without ceremony. No alarms, no warning signs, no sense of triumph. She could have left quietly. That had always been the plan. Pack before dawn. A car to the airport. A flight booked under a name that wasn't hers. No goodbyes. No confrontation. No echoes. But silence had a way of rotting into something heavier. And Min-ho Choi had a habit of leaving questions unanswered. Sasha understood then that if she walked away cleanly, she would carry him with her. His watchful calm, his unfinished truths, the unspoken debt between them. Escape would not be freedom. It would be unfinished business. So she changed the plan. She dressed carefully, not for travel but for intention. She didn't call the car she'd arranged for the airport. Instead, she sent it somewhere else. The private lounge, or the place Min-ho went when deals were done, and the city felt obedient beneath his feet. She knew what stepping into that room meant. No deniability, no retreat, no illusion of invisibility. The music was already playing when she entered. Men laughed softly. Glasses caught the light. Seoul glittered beyond the windows, unaware it was about to witness a fracture. Sasha didn't hesitate. She crossed the room with purpose, ignoring the way conversation thinned behind her, ignoring the looks, ignoring the instinct screaming that this was a mistake she would not survive. She stopped directly in front of him. Min-ho Choi turned slowly, his expression unreadable, his attention settling on her as if he had been expecting this moment all along. She said nothing. She raised her hand, and the room fell silent. This was after the slap. After she struck the most feared man in the city and walked away, untouched. What Sasha didn't know, what she would only understand later as engines stalled and departures were delayed, was that Min-ho's silence was never mercy. It was calculation. She believed she had been allowed to leave. She believed she was running toward escape. But by the time she reached the airport, the man who owned the city was already there, waiting. The airport smelled like disinfectant and false calm. Sasha sat rigid in her seat as the cabin lights dimmed, hands folded in her lap, heart steady in a way that felt unreal. Outside the window, runway lights stretched into the dark like a promise she was finally about to keep. She didn't look back. She didn't allow herself to think about the mansion, the quiet rooms, the coat left on her chair. She didn't think about Min-ho's eyes the last time they had met across a crowded room. Too knowing, too still. This was clean. This was done. The doors closed with a muted thud. The engines began their low, gathering hum. Then, nothing happened. Minutes passed. A murmur rippled through the cabin as flight attendants exchanged glances. The hum died down instead of rising. A voice crackled faintly over the intercom, apologetic, vague, rehearsed. Sasha's pulse ticked once, twice. She knew before she saw him. Footsteps moved down the aisle, unhurried, deliberate. People turned in their seats, irritation giving way to confusion. Then something quieter as recognition spread without names being spoken. Min-ho stopped beside her row. He didn't touch her, didn't ask her to stand. "Come with me," he said calmly. Not a request. The cabin felt very small as she rose and followed him off the plane, past confused staff and open-mouthed passengers. No one stopped them. No one tried. Outside, the night air was sharp against her skin. "You stopped the plane," she said, once they were alone. "Yes." "How?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You're asking the wrong question." They were back in the car moments later, the city rushing toward them instead of away. Sasha stared straight ahead, jaw tight, the plan she had constructed so carefully collapsing inward. At the mansion, Min-ho led her not to the study, but to the smaller sitting room overlooking the gardens. The lights were low. The glass reflected them faintly. Two figures standing on opposite sides of an invisible line. "I knew," he said simply. Her breath caught despite herself. "The coffee," he continued. "The accounts. The money leaving in increments designed not to trigger alarms. The travel bookings." He paused. "Your escape." Sasha turned on him then, anger flaring hot and sharp. "Then why didn't you stop me?" "I wanted to know who you were," he said evenly. "When you believed I was your enemy." The words landed harder than any accusation. "You let me steal from you," she said. "You let me plan to disappear." "Yes." "Why?" "Because people reveal themselves under pressure," he replied. "And I needed to see which version of you would surface." Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Back in the study minutes later, Sasha finally broke. "You killed my father," she said, the words tearing free before she could stop them. "You ordered it. You destroyed my family and then brought me into your house like it meant nothing." Min-ho froze. For the first time since she had met him, his composure fractured. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. She stepped closer, years of grief and fury pouring out. "Don't pretend. I saw the records, the transfers, your intermediaries, and Jade, my sister. You used her. You used her to get to me." His face hardened, but not with anger, with shock. "You think I touched your family," he said slowly. "You didn't deny it," she shot back. "I didn't know what you were accusing me of," he replied, "until now." Something shifted then, subtle but undeniable. Min-ho turned away, pacing once, hands clenched behind his back. "I never ordered your father's death," he said. "I never even knew his name until you said it just now." She laughed, brittle and broken. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to listen," he said sharply. He stopped in front of her, eyes dark with something dangerously close to doubt. "If those documents exist, they didn't come from me." "Then who?" "My inner circle," he said. The words tasted bitter. For the first time, Min-ho Choi allowed himself to consider something he had never fully entertained. That the people closest to him had been using his name as a shield. That crimes had been committed in his shadow. That trust, his most carefully guarded currency, had been misplaced. "I helped your sister," he said quietly. "Once, briefly, because she reminded me of someone I lost. I didn't know who she was to you. I didn't keep her. I didn't harm her." Sasha stared at him. Heart pounding, certainty crumbling under the weight of possibility. "If you're telling the truth," she whispered, "then everything I thought I knew is wrong." Min-ho met her gaze, something raw flickering beneath his control. "Then we're both standing on unfamiliar ground," he said. The silence that followed was different from before. Not threatening, unsettled. If Min-ho wasn't the villain, then who had been orchestrating her pain from inside his world? The message came just before dawn. Sasha was halfway through pulling on her jacket when her phone vibrated violently against the table, skidding across the polished surface as if it were trying to escape her grip. She saw the sender and felt the blood drain from her face. Ji-hoon. No greeting, no pretense, just a video. Her thumb hovered for half a second, long enough for hope to flicker, irrational and desperate, before she opened it. The screen filled with a dimly lit room. Concrete walls, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling swaying slightly. The camera angle was tilted, careless. Jade sat on the floor. Her wrists were bound. Her face was bruised, but she was alive. "Sasha," Jade whispered hoarsely, her eyes lifting toward the lens. "Please." The camera shifted. Ji-hoon crouched into view, smiling. "You see?" he said pleasantly. "This could have been avoided." The video ended. Sasha was already moving. She didn't think, didn't plan. She grabbed her keys, her bag, and ran. The address Ji-hoon sent was vague. Industrial, intentionally nondescript, but Sasha recognized the area from her research. Old warehouses near the river, abandoned during redevelopment, forgotten by the city, perfect for disappearing people. Her car skidded to a stop near the entrance. She barely registered the cold air biting into her lungs as she sprinted toward the building, heart hammering so hard it drowned out reason. "Sasha!" a voice called behind her. She didn't turn. She burst through the door, breath ragged, fear sharp enough to burn. Inside, and the air smelled of rust and damp concrete. "Jade!" she shouted. Footsteps echoed. She ran toward them, and stumbled as someone grabbed her from behind. The world tilted. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering across the floor as she was dragged backward. "Too fast," Ji-hoon murmured near her ear. "That's what makes you predictable." She struggled, fought, kicked, managed to break free long enough to see Jade across the room, eyes wide with terror. Then something struck the side of her head. The world went dark. Min-ho found the phone an hour later. It lay face down on the concrete floor just inside the warehouse entrance, the screen cracked but still glowing faintly. He picked it up carefully, thumb brushing the edge where blood had smeared the glass. The silence inside him was absolute. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't hesitate. Instead, he opened the phone. He had installed the protocol himself months ago, an emergency recorder buried beneath layers of permissions, triggered remotely. A last resort measure, rarely used. He activated it now. The screen didn't change. The phone appeared dead, but it was listening. "Bind her properly," Ji-hoon said, irritation creeping into his voice. "I don't want any more surprises." Sasha groaned softly. "There," So-young replied coolly. "She won't be moving again." Min-ho closed his eyes. The recorder captured everything. Ji-hoon's pacing footsteps, the scrape of a chair, Sasha's labored breathing. "You really should have left when you had the chance," Ji-hoon continued. "You almost got away with it." "You killed my father," Sasha said weakly. A pause. Then Ji-hoon laughed. "Yes," he said casually. He asked too many questions, thought paperwork would protect him. Min-ho's jaw tightened. "And the documents?" Sasha pressed. "The evidence you sent me." "Forged," Ji-hoon replied without hesitation. "Effective, though. You believed them. That's what mattered." So-young spoke then, voice sharp with resentment. "You were never meant to be here. You were a tool, just like your sister." Sasha's breath hitched. "I used Min-ho's name," Ji-hoon continued. "Everyone does. It keeps things clean, keeps suspicion pointed in the right direction. Min-ho opened his eyes. Cold settled into his bones. You kidnapped Jade to control me, Sasha whispered. Yes, Ji-hoon said simply. And now you've brought him to me. The recorder caught the final sound clearly. A gun being cocked. Min-ho ended the recording. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, phone clenched in his hand, the weight of betrayal pressing down with surgical precision. Ji-hoon, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who had stood at his side for years, who had eaten at his table, who had spoken his name with loyalty on his tongue while committing atrocities behind his back, and So Young, whose family humiliation had curdled into something poisonous and patient. Min-ho did not raise his voice when he turned to his men. Lock down the perimeter, he said calmly. No one leaves. Weapons were drawn. Orders relayed. Engines ignited. Min-ho slipped the phone into his pocket. He didn't feel anger. He felt clarity. Ji-hoon had made a fatal mistake. He had mistaken patience for blindness and mercy for weakness. Min-ho stepped into the waiting car, eyes fixed on the horizon where the city bled into shadow. The final confrontation would not be quiet. It would be decisive. Rain turned the rooftop into glass. Water slicked across concrete, pooling at the edges. The city below reduced to a blur of fractured light. Wind whipped hard, tugging at coats and hair and fear alike. Sasha was on her knees. So Young stood behind Jade, one arm locked tight around her sister's shoulders, the other hand steady on the gun pressed to Jade's temple. Jade's breath came in short, panicked bursts, her eyes fixed on Sasha with desperate clarity. You never should have come here, So Young said, her voice thin with fury. You took everything from us. Sasha lifted her chin, rain running down her face, heart pounding but steady. I didn't take anything, she said. Hey, you did. Ji-hoon lay groaning near the far wall, blood dark against the concrete where Sasha's earlier strike had landed. Guards ringed the rooftop now, weapons raised, fingers tight on triggers. End it, one of them urged. So Young's hand trembled. That was all Sasha needed. She moved. In one fluid motion, Sasha lunged sideways, slamming her shoulder into So Young's leg. The gun discharged, the sound cracking through the storm, the bullet tearing into the air where Jade's head had been a heartbeat earlier. Sasha grabbed Jade's wrist and ran. They sprinted across the rooftop, slipping, sliding, lungs burning as shouts erupted behind them. A guard raised his weapon. The shot came from nowhere. A single, precise crack split the night. The guard dropped instantly. The roar of helicopter blades tore through the rain, and drowning out everything else. Wind battered the rooftop as the aircraft hovered overhead, its searchlight slicing through the darkness. Min-ho stood in the open doorway. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, suit ruined, expression carved from something colder than rage. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He raised a tablet. Across the city, screens flickered to life. Billboards, transit monitors, public displays. Ji-hoon's voice echoed through Seoul, unmistakable, damning. I used Min-ho's name. Everyone does. Yes, I killed her father. Forged documents are easy when people want to believe. So Young froze. The city listened. Reputation collapsed in real time. Min-ho stepped onto the rooftop as his men swarmed, disarming guards, securing the space. So Young dropped the gun, and face crumpling as the weight of exposure crushed whatever defiance she had left. Sasha held Jade tightly, both of them shaking now that it was over. Min-ho crossed the distance between them, and then did something no one expected. He knelt. Rain soaked into his trousers as he lowered himself in front of Sasha, ignoring the city, his men, the stunned silence. I heard everything, he said quietly. Every word. I know what they did. I know what you believed. Sasha stared at him, breath catching. I won't ask you to forgive me, he continued. I won't excuse my world. But I choose you, openly, without condition. Not as protection, not as leverage. He took her hand and pressed it to his chest, over the steady beat of his heart. As my equal. The rain softened, as if the city itself were listening. Sasha swallowed hard, emotion rising fast and sharp. She helped him to his feet, fingers still tangled in his. Jade leaned into her side, alive, safe. Hours later, the mansion felt different. Quieter, but not empty. Sasha stood in the kitchen, the lights warm, the windows fogged from the rain outside. She poured 2 drinks with deliberate care, set them on the counter, and turned. Min-ho watched her from the doorway. Jacket gone, sleeves rolled up. The edges of his control softened but intact. She handed him a glass and met his gaze. I think, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. I need a raise. Min-ho allowed himself one in return. And for the first time, the house felt like something they had chosen. Not a cage, but a beginning.